We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. Lindsay Patterson, Mike Santagata here. Mike, how are you?
A little tired, but I'm good. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Currently dealing with a temporary water outage in the city.
Oh,
So really hoping that gets figured out soon. But other than that, it's just the 500th day of January, ready for February to get here. And obviously Senior Bowl content and all of that all over the social media timeline right now. So we are making our way to the off season of the NFL that is somewhat busy in the next few weeks.
yeah. Senior Bowl hits. See a bunch of names I don't recognize. And from there, I know the draft is soon. I know that free agency starts first, but it's almost like it's not worth it to think that much about free agency at the moment
Mhm.
because so many of the guys you could be clamoring for get tagged, get signed, maybe get tagged and traded. Like it's just I think about it after the tagging period and then free agency is about to start. That's when I look into it like, okay, cool. Like I know who's going to be out there and time to look into see who they could get. I've looked into it like before they sign people before, but anymore it's almost like I can't just wait for them to get signed. I
Yep.
remember doing a big article on like every free agent offensive lineman, and like some of them got signed, re-signed, and then like some of them Bengals never had a chance. I was like writing that. I was like, I watched 3 games of this guy and I wrote about it. I was like, well, they're never going to sign this guy. And then some of it's like, they signed Alex Kappa and Ted Karras immediately. So it was like, okay, that article life was 30 minutes because now it's just tell us about Alex Kappa and Alex Kappa. Oh, so you should clump those two. Alex Kappa and Ted Karras, everything you can about them right now. And it's less about like, let's take a look at all the available guys. So free agency, I kind of just wait for those guys that sign. But the draft, there's like a billion people you need to watch. So getting started on that by also getting started on Al Golden.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's the
Let's
time.
get to Al Golden, and we'll get to
Okay.
a little bit of the rest of the news. We can head on a little bit of the outlook over the next few weeks for the Cincinnati Bengals when it comes to their front office and some decisions that they need to make. But I will start with this news because it did break earlier today, and it is just an absolute bummer, Mike. Eric All, according to Paul Diener Jr., will miss the 2025 season. He is expected to have another ACL repair surgery this spring. So really unfortunate for him. He obviously battled injuries, was coming off an ACL injury, then was injured again on November 3rd. So just an absolute bummer. Not only because he was a nice addition as a rookie to the Bengals offense, but just as a person, for someone who has battled injuries, really hope that he can take this year of 2025 and get better and recover, and hopefully his future is still bright in the NFL.
Yeah. This stinks for those reasons. And also, I guess the way I understand it is he had like a botched ACL surgery in a way to where it was likely it retore when he was in college. And that's what happened here. So they had to fix that. And then they can, it just seems like a mess. Like,
Yeah.
oh, geez. And now, promising rookie all season tears it. And the immediate thought is like, oh man, he's done that before. Well, I
Yeah.
hope he gets back. And then like this stuff happens and turns like, oh, I hope he plays again. He's young, so he's able to recover. But man, that is a long period of time to miss, and it just stinks to just know that you have an entire season ahead of you that's just rehab, and then another off season ahead of you that's rehab, all just to get back onto the field.
Yeah, and with ACL injuries, obviously we see them all the time in the NFL. Joe Burrow dealt with one. NFL players every year that they have those. So when his injury did happen in November, obviously we knew he'd be out for the season. But I was still encouraged to think, okay, you get the surgery, you get your recovery. Rehab is around the 6 to 9 month period. Sometimes it takes a full year to fully be back, but now we're seeing just in 2025 how players have bounced back from that. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. hopefully he can keep that positive mindset and recover and rehab and be good as new in 2026. But just really unfortunate for someone who felt really early on that it was a steal for the Bengals. And, Lewis Reddick, somebody who was really high on that draft pick. I know he said on draft night when they drafted him in the 4th round, if this guy can stay healthy, he can be one of the best tight ends in the NFL. And just from those few reps in his rookie year, it was encouraging. So wishing Eric all the best. Unfortunate news. But hopefully we continue to get positive updates on his recovery. But speaking of the Bengals, again, Al Golden. Mike, did you have a chance to watch that press conference on Monday at Paycor Stadium?
I watched parts. I don't know if I watched the entire thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I know how people feel. Anytime a coach is hired or even a coordinator, you're going to hear that coach speak. So obviously, it's always encouraging. Oh, it's a breath of fresh air. It's a new voice. Kind of felt like, no offense to Lou Anarumo, but a little bit of a stale voice. After a while, after so many years, it was time to refresh the room. Wish him all the best with the Colts. But Al Golden said everything that I would want to hear in a defensive coordinator. And look, the front office has to work with Al Golden when it comes to free agency. What are they going to do with Trey Hendrickson? Their linebacker room, their secondary, there's so many different positions. And even on draft day, could they change their ways at 17 and take a defensive tackle? We'll see what that looks like. But overall, I just felt pretty encouraged for what he was able to say when Al Golden was here. I know we've talked about that plenty in 2020, 2021. Big reason when it comes to the drafting of Logan Wilson, Akeem Davis-Gaither. Obviously, Marcus Bailey is no longer with the Cincinnati Bengals, but still hit on all of those linebacker picks, I would say, out of that draft. One of their best drafts under the Joe Burrow era. But I felt like I enjoyed what he said, and not even almost in his press conference. He was doing his TV interviews with WCPO, one of the reporters, and I apologize, I'm just not remembering his name right now, but he had asked Al Golden about the rookies because, kind of felt like some of the fans were frustrated that we didn't see the youth. We didn't see other players playing the vets out there when they should have been giving the other guys opportunities. And he's just like, look, we're not drafting these guys to stand by us. They need to make an impact. And I think that's absolutely huge in what you want to hear out of a coach, because the younger guys are going to need to make an impact in 2025.
Probably. I mean, I guess we'll wait for free agency. Maybe they just maybe they just sign a bunch of guys. I mean, if you're going to sign a bunch of people, you're probably not going to sign high-level guys, but maybe you strike gold with like what they did in 2021, where they signed DJ Reader. That was their big fish, but then you're also signing guys like Chidobe Awuzie to a mid-level type of deal, and then going out and getting Von Bell, and he plays above that contract, and Mike Hilton plays above his contract. Maybe you can make that magic happen again. Or to me, I'm with you. We're like, let's get the youth out there, because they've drafted a lot of defensive talent. I mean, obviously you can't get Zach Carter out there, but in terms of like top 100 picks, there's a ton of them. We've gone through them before. It's just anything from all the way back, like Cam Taylor-Britt and Dax Hill, up through Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson. And can you find a way to get those guys out there playing productive, meaningful snaps? Or is that not on the cards? But I would think that if they can get out there, you got to play them. And that all starts with possibly also cutting some of the other guys. But yeah, I'm hoping he has a plan in which he's talked about. I heard that part. Have a plan for the people that you bring in. And I think that's big, because they didn't have a plan for Dax Hill. Felt like they really didn't have much of a plan for Myles Murphy. And those are 2 first-round picks. So when you don't have a plan for those guys to get them into a position to succeed, that's how they end up kind of wasting 2 years of their career.
Yeah, and I want to get to what you've watched from the Notre Dame side and their defense, and just some of those highlights and what you can compare from what you see from him at Notre Dame to the NFL. But just overall, you're encouraged by that. I again hope the front office works with Al. I hope Al is a huge part. And it sounded like he was going to be a part of that. Zach Taylor told him, like, look, you've been going strong since spring football to the national championship, because if you're a college football coach, it is a nonstop role. And I'm saying, not trying to say the NFL isn't hard or anything like that on the coaching side, but it's a little bit different in college football. So Zach was trying to tell him, hey, take some time off and then we'll be ready to go. And I was like, no, we got to get to work. I'm ready to roll. And obviously they have their defensive staff put together. Jeremy Montgomery, somebody who Al Golden was like, look, I've gone against him plenty of times. He held a job with the Green Bay Packers for quite some time. And then you flip over to the linebacker coach, Mike Hodges. He's one of those from the Saints who was with them. And I think the Bengals had interest in him in 2019 when they were doing the Lou Anarumo interviews. And they wanted him to be a part of the staff, and Zach still liked him, and he's with the Cincinnati Bengals. He was their defensive run game coordinator at late in the season for the Saints. So that seems encouraging for some of the roles that he's been able to bring. He'll be in the linebacker room. When it comes to the defensive staff as a whole, were there any surprises, and how do you feel about it right now? Because I feel like they're done when it comes to any hires.
I think Montgomery was a little bit of a surprise for me. I didn't know much about him. So seeing him, it's like, okay. And then it's like, he's the Patriots guy. And he's got to go, oh, okay. And he also did the Packers. But then it seems mixed on whether or not he did the Packers edge room, which would be the exciting part, versus the interior room, which would be that room didn't really do much for them part of it. But then you hear Mike Daniels, he's like, oh, he worked with everybody and he loves them. So I don't know what to think about it. So if I don't know, I'm not going to say I have an opinion on it. I genuinely, I don't know. And apparently guys in New England, players liked him. And from what I heard from a New England guy that I trust, sometimes the coaches, he seemed to butt heads with like some of the other coaches, like the defensive coordinator and him didn't see the game the same way. Not that they were fighting on the sideline, but just in terms of like what he wanted and what the defensive coordinator wanted might not have been the same thing. Linebacker coach, I'm intrigued. I know this is probably the least important of the position coaches when you have Al Golden, who is a linebackers guy, but I'm intrigued because it's the Saints guy. And if I had to pick some of the Saints do well, linebackers, yeah, Demario Davis, which is a free agent signing, but he certainly played better football in New Orleans than he did in Buffalo. And then Pete Werner drafted, I don't think he was a high pick, but I'm going to fact check that just so I know for sure. But Pete Werner's developed into being a solid linebacker that throws his body. Second round. Okay. Outside the top 50, though. He was pick 60. But still, drafted, developed, became a pretty good starter for them. Loves throwing his body around, being physical. I think that is one thing when you watch the Saints defense, to me, the linebackers stand out. It's like, well, these guys are physical. These guys are tough. And these guys play hard. They're good players. I think the weird one is Zach Bond was on that team, but as a defensive end / linebacker, and kind of a bust for a first round pick, and then goes to Philly and is a first team All Pro as an off ball linebacker.
He's not doing too bad right now.
Yeah, maybe what happened there, but other than that, I really like what New Orleans has done with their linebackers. And he wasn't drafted to be a linebacker for them. I believe he was drafted to play defensive end for them and just didn't see the field. So, hey, that's another one you kind of look at. Like, hey, other teams sometimes they don't have plans either. They just draft guys. They think he's good. They go like, oh, he's not working at defensive end. Man, just shove him down the depth chart. He's really smart. Yeah, that's great. That goes to Philly. He's able to use that. Anyway, I'm intrigued by it, though, because we'll get to Al Golden's defense for a while today. I think Dennis Allen in the New Orleans defense is not a one-to-one comparison, but they play defense a little bit more similar to Al Golden, or Al Golden plays defense a little more similar to them than you might think. When you're talking about how they play defensively, they slow play things, react, then attack, react, attack football up front. And we'll get all to all this, but like they slow play from a 4 down front. That's not normal. Like D'Amico Ryans, he fast plays from that 4 down front. Robert Saleh, he's fast. He's playing fast out of that 4 down front. Saleh, I think Aaron Glenn and Steve Spagnuolo, which would be, those are 3 great minds. Or not. Allen Aaron Glenn and Steve Spagnuolo, the only guys I think of that really play slow out of their 4-down fronts. And then also blitzers. They like blitzing. And that is also something that Al Golden liked to do at Notre Dame. We'll get into all that. But I found it interesting in terms of like maybe you could read a little bit of a tea leaf of like maybe this is something he might change to be a little bit more like the New Orleans defense in the NFL. And also just looking at that and going like, yeah, I like New Orleans defense, and Al Golden's running a similar ship at Notre Dame in a way in terms of some of the stuff they do. So it'll be interesting. That's the one I'm intrigued by. I'm not going to say it's like an A+ hire. I don't know that much about him, but I saw that and I went like, that's the most intriguing positional coach hire on the defensive side to me.
Yeah, like I said, the Bengals had interest in him years ago. And I know he's a young coach. He's not super old. I think 38, so young in the coaching years. But someone who they've kind of kept their eye on, and they've thought a lot of, and I feel like they've done that quite a bit this offseason with some of their hires, people that they've had interest in. We can include the offensive line coach, who we've talked about plenty on this podcast. But the focus is Al Golden. You went back and you watched some of that Notre Dame defense, and I know Bengals fans, I think they should follow all of your Twitter clips. Make sure you go check it out, Bengals_Sands. You have a piece over on Bengals Talk that fans should go check out. But if you were to just give a summary, when you went back and you watched that tape, this is what you know about Al Golden now and what he could possibly be bringing to Cincinnati.
Okay. I kind of hinted at 4 down front, likes having 4 defensive linemen, and generally they end up in a 4-2-5 nickel type look, and the Bengals ran that a lot. That's generally what you're going to get into just because of the offenses you face. But the difference is I thought Lou Anarumo liked being in a 5-2-3-4 base more often than not, where Al Golden, when they go heavy, he likes being more in that 4-3 type of world. So that's a little bit different. He's aggressive. I think that's something that's really interesting. And his front end is extremely interesting to me. I wrote, that's my latest article, is everything to do with the front. And, read that if you want to know everything you could possibly want to know from like what positions are called and what they do, all the way to like the blitzes and movements and stem stunts, everything you could imagine, how they play the run in this mysterious Viper position. All of that out there. And we'll get there. I've become a hater, but we'll get there. So they play slow up front from a 4-down defense, which is a little bit different. And I talked about Aaron Glenn, Dennis Allen, Steve Spagnuolo. They kind of all do that a little bit, maybe a little bit less Spags. I think he does get a little bit aggressive and send, get up the field penetration sometimes. But I do think Glenn and Allen both slow play their fronts like this. So interesting, because when you think 4 down, 1 high defense, you think aggressive, shoot the gaps, get off the ball, and penetrate. So I found that interesting. What I find really interesting is all the movement he does, where there's 4 defensive linemen. And generally, you'll line up, you'll have a nose in between the guard and the center, a tackle between the guard and the tackle, 2 ends outside of the tackles. But what he does is there's a pre-snap movement, and this is really cool. It's called stemming. This is something that doesn't happen a ton in the NFL. This is more popular in college and stuff. I hope he brings it, because I don't see why this wouldn't be popular in the NFL. But when the quarterback, so you line up on defense, and let's say you're in an even front 4-down lineman, the quarterback comes to the line, checks. You see him go up there and just like, Larry, and then starts walking back. The second he starts walking back, they shift. Every defensive lineman moves, and maybe they move to an odd front. That's a general movement, is just let's move the nose straight over the center, have 2 defensive tackles between the guard and the tackle, and then 2 outside linebackers outside of that. That's going to ruin whatever check you just made. You made a check to deal with the over front you saw, and now you're facing a completely different front. So I find that really cool. Sometimes that draws false starts too, just because like you see a bunch of movement right before he goes, like you're taught to like tap him. He jumped off sides, right? Like I saw movement, but it's really cool though, because you don't see it in the NFL where check, whatever, move. And sometimes I think about that too, where I'm like, you're just kind of sitting there sometimes where like the quarterback is going up there and he's making a change at the line. There's like 5 seconds left. Why don't you just change too? Be like, well, you're not going to be able to change back, are you? 5 seconds left on the play clock. So we'll see if that continues, but I found that really interesting. So that's a pre-snap movement. And you can think of that kind of like how the offense makes pre-snap movements to change the picture. This is them changing the picture on defense. That doesn't have to deal with the safeties back there. Because he doesn't really shift them too much. At least he didn't at Notre Dame. The other part is post-snap movement. And we've talked about stunts and stuff before, mainly about how the Bengals struggle at picking them up. He runs a ton of them. He runs a ton of stunts with everybody. Tackle and the nose can run a stunt together. The tackle and end can run a stunt together. He runs them with the linebacker. There's a cool play where he runs the linebacker as the penetrator on stunt. Generally, you have the nose. He's right there. Just have him slant one way. Linebacker goes off of his butt the other. No, he sent the linebacker crashing into the center and the nose looped around him. It worked. It was great. And then he runs three-man stunts. He runs those on both sides of the formation. They'll have three guys doing a stunt on this side, two on that side. It's really cool to really stress the communication of the offensive line. Doesn't always work. This is not a 100% success rate. And you could use these in the run game too, and he did. But really cool because I don't think Lou did a ton of that even with the struggling pass rush. It felt like, and maybe it was just some of it's the execution too. When they did run them, they didn't run them that well. So I think that's part of it. But if he can get them to run stunts well, I mean, that's a way to just get free pass rushing opportunities that has nothing to do with, hey, I need that guy to win one-on-one. No longer do you need Chris Jenkins to just win a one-on-one fight. Have him go with Murphy, and neither one of them produced much as pass rushers last year. Have them just run stunts together. Have Jenkins try to free up Murphy. Have Murphy try to free up Jenkins and work together. It's the pick and roll of football. Right? You get the pick, and the guy rolls around him, the two-man game of football. And I don't think they did it well or enough, the Bengals, with Coach Anarumo the last two seasons. I think it could have helped. So I think that's something I'm excited to see with Al. The blitzes, I think this is the part we talk about where he loves playing. So there's two parts of this. He loves blitzing, but he loves a five-man pressure. And that is not an all-out blitz. I think this is the part we need to talk. He's not always sending cover zero. He's typically playing cover one, and then instead of having that underneath defender, a linebacker, whoever, he likes to send that guy too. He just likes to, let's get five rushing the quarterback. I do think that both the man coverage, the cover one aspect of his defense, and this five-man pressure is probably going to scale back. It was his most common defense in college. Just loved sending pressure and playing man coverage. I think because of one, the caliber of athlete in the NFL, two, the rules. I think that's a big part. In college, you can be more physical in coverage than you can in the NFL. The NFL has their illegal contact rule, the holding rule. That just doesn't really matter in college. Like, you can grab guys, you can reroute them, you can chuck them, you can move them, you can be physical in coverage before the ball's in the air. NFL, you can't do that. So when you look at the most common coverages in the NFL, the most often the team that ran cover one the most often was the Detroit Lions this season under Aaron Glenn, which is one reason I think he's a little bit similar. We've got two reasons there, actually, because of the 4-down slow play, but also this cover one stuff. It was at 37%. It's basically third downs, 33% of those, and then a little bit more, because cover one's a really common call on third down. Part of it is because it's easier to defend the run out of zone. You got your eyes in the right place. The Browns also up there. They run 35% cover one. Patriots 35%. Those are like your most, and year over year, those will be true. Most common, the highest frequency of cover one. And, if you just count all man, that includes zero blitzes and two man, the Lions end up at 46%. That's still under 50%. Like, they're still not hitting what you might think a team that is a man coverage heavy team would hit. It's just not that common in the NFL. So I think he's going to have to dial it back, because for him, he ran, I don't have the exact percentage, but I do have a little chart that has a heat map. So trying to read that, it looks like it was almost 80% of the time he ran cover one. And watching the film, I would believe that. I would believe that it's some form of cover. There's a lot of different variations out there, a lot of different ways to play it. He didn't just run the one way of cover one and get beat a ton. Ran it every different way and knew the weaknesses of the coverage. It's going to be nowhere close to that. Going to be nowhere close to the 75, whatever percentage he ran last season. Nowhere close. I think at most you're looking at like what the Lions ran, 35 type of percent, somewhere around there, underneath 40% probably. So, and then also you start looking at the Bengals personnel, you're like, well, they're not really built to run a ton of man coverage, right? Like you don't have linebackers that are going to sprint down the field with tight ends and a safety who you feel is like super comfortable as a man coverage safety. And then your corners on the outside, they might be better in zone. They might be, I think DJ Turner is a heck of an athlete, but can't do it. It's a little tight in the hips. He can be physical. He can play. I'm not saying these guys can't play man. Then you look at Mike Hilton. I think it's the biggest one. If Mike Hilton's still on the team, it's like, well, you're not going to run man coverage. You need that guy in zone. Eyes forward. His best stuff is playing the run and not trying to run with high caliber athletes on the outside anymore. So I think that's the conversation you have to have because he ran a ton of cover one, and I just don't expect it to continue in the NFL. That's the one part of his defense I don't. And the pressures will probably dial back a little bit. Don't think you blitz as much. And that's partially just like quarterbacks are so good. If you're just going to blitz a ton, quarterbacks are going to kill you, like good quarterbacks. Maybe you could do that against bad quarterbacks. Maybe you could, you line up against, let's say Watson recovers and he goes out there. You could blitz him. You could blitz him fine. But don't do it to like, you go out there. And this is like one of those like, don't go out there to Patrick Mahomes and be like, yeah, we're going to run a bunch of 5-man pressures. We're going to try to send a bunch of heat at him. It's like, don't do that. That doesn't work. That doesn't work against Patrick Mahomes. Doesn't work against Lamar Jackson anymore. It used to. Doesn't work against Josh Allen. It's like, that stuff doesn't work against those guys. You got to have a different answer. And I think he'll have that because I just think if I know this stuff, the defensive coordinator that spent years, decades coaching football at both the college and NFL level, he knows he's probably not going to be able to get away with as much man coverage in the league. But that's basically it. He was a man-heavy 4-down front, did a lot of moving around on the front. I guess the other part is we will talk, because I have to, because the fan base is enamored with it, about the Viper. To me, this is just a defensive end. He stands up instead of gets into a 3-point stance. He's in a 2-point stance instead of a 3. He is a defensive end on 95% of plays. That's all he is. He's just a second defensive end on the other side. That's all he plays it like a defensive end. He sets the edge. He, rushes the passer normally. And then you have 5, maybe 10% of plays where he could either move around or he could drop into coverage. I don't think this is something that they need to like go find a different body type for. I don't think, because the Viper was actually the same exact size as the defensive end in his defense. They were all like 250 to 260 pounds. The Viper was actually bigger than the defensive end. Like their starting Viper was bigger than their starting defensive end. This is not Akeem Davis-Gaither. This is not a spot for Jermaine Pratt. This is not a spot where you go find a guy as a linebacker and just go like, oh yeah, the Viper, that's going to be a linebacker that plays defensive end. And he does both. It's like, no, it's a defensive end that stands up. And then just the 5% of plays, if this even comes to the NFL, 5% of plays he might drop into coverage. And the Bengals already did that. They were sending guys back into coverage. I know because I watched, and you guys know because you screamed about it anytime you saw like Trey Hendrickson drop into coverage, or even Joseph Ossai, Miles Murphy, Sam Hubbard drop into coverage. You're like, why is that guy in coverage? Hey, that's just is what it is. Sometimes you got to drop those guys. I would prefer never to drop Trey Hendrickson, but the other guys, sometimes maybe you drop them just to try to confuse the offense and run a blitz on the other side. But that's about it. That's all he does. It's a cool name because when you go to a high school recruit, you go to a high school player, you're like, hey, you're not just a defensive end. You're a Viper in this defense. And the kid will think that's really cool. Like, that's all it is to me. Like, this is all a huge thing with like Nick Saban, the star. It's like, yeah, he was the nickel corner. Like, what are we making the star out to be like, oh, and that's the key to the defense. At least with the star, it always was like one of the best players on his defense. To me, the Viper in Al Golden's defense was like one of the worst players, usually. Not that he was terrible, but it was just like, yeah, I'm not thinking that guy's a future NFLer. He was like a 6-year senior, the starter. And I was like, yeah, he doesn't look like an NFL guy to me. Both defensive tackles were better. The linebackers are better. The corners are better. The safeties are better. It's like he was probably the 9th or 10th, maybe 11th best starter on that defense. I don't think it's a key to this defense to unlocking the defense. It was just something cool to call his second defensive end and treat it a little bit different. To me, that's what I think. But I know fans are – They've taken up. They love this idea of a Viper. That is scheme to them.
Have you noticed? There's a couple things I want to hit on with him. Have you noticed the change in vibes for how people felt a week ago to where they are about this time. I think everyone's just kind of, they're like, okay, let's see what this looks like.
Isn't that what happens
And
with
always we do a free
it's the
agency.
off season. Yeah, it's the off season. They could have brought Paul Gunther out
No,
from the grave, and fans at this point in the year would go like,
no way.
we had a pretty good defense in 2015.
No,
It was a top 3 unit. Yeah, Paul's gonna take us there. There'd
no,
at least be
no.
some fans saying that. I don't know about every fan. It would be this excited, but I think there would be a section of the famous go, yeah, Paul got a bad rap.
Well, I also think if he wasn't someone who was here for those 2 years and it was a new face, and it was the Notre Dame defensive coordinator that they thought a lot of and they were bringing back to the NFL, I think fans would have looked at it differently. We don't have to go back to the process and all of that, but we'll see what it looks like. Look, it's different. It's a different ball game. We've talked about that before when it comes to the talent and the players. It's difficult in the NFL. You mentioned it. Good quarterbacks. What is that going to look like when you are facing these top guys? And if you do want to be playing in January, you're going to see some of the best in the AFC. So all of that is extremely important. It's a huge offseason for the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, if we just kind of outline it right now, Senior Bowl is this weekend. Duke Tobin is there, and the scouts are there to be determined if the Cincinnati Bengals do change their ways and say, you know what, we want to go defensive tackle in the first round, or since it is a very heavy defensive tackle draft, we don't have to get into too much draft talk, do they decide to trade back, get some more picks? They value picks more than any NFL franchise in the whole entire world. They only have 6. So there's a lot of decisions they're going to have to make. Obviously, the combine is going to be a few weeks away. They have to make a decision with T. Higgins. Will he be franchise tagged again and they try to work out a contract, or will they be letting him go? That's in about a month. We're going to have a little bit of information on the outlook of T. Higgins, and then free agency obviously begins pretty much the second week of March. So there's a lot happening, even though it has felt like a long off season for the Cincinnati Bengals. We're only a couple weeks in. But there was a couple things that I do want to go over with Al Golden, and you went back and you've explained it. You watched the tape, plenty of clips. Go check out Cincinnati Bengals Talk, Mike's work on Al Golden. There's a popular name that I think a lot of Bengals fans are very high on, Xavier Watts. How do you feel about him?
I like him a lot. Yeah, I think he's a second rounder. I think he's like I think I ended up in my thing. I think I give him an early second. And I will also say he was my favorite defensive player on Notre Dame.
Cool.
And I know there's another player. We'll talk about it, I guess.
Yeah.
But he was my favorite. And now I do think the one part of this is he's a little older. So it makes sense that he was playing so well. But he is awesome back there. I think he's smart. I think, he's a physical player. I think that he was more of a key on how that defense worked than this Viper, but really any other part of it. I feel like he was the key on how it worked. He was able to play zone, he was able to play man, he's able to fit the run, especially. That's one of the best things he does is play the run from deep and just recognizing run versus play action and whatever else, just flying down the field and make those plays. A good blitzer. Really loved him. To me, one of the things that I really liked is, this is going to sound like a knock at first, and this is why he's a second rounder and not a first rounder. He is not an elite athlete. Not that he's a terrible athlete, but I expect him to be kind of solid athletically. And he plays above that, especially like the top end speed is the thing I'm thinking of. Is like he doesn't have Ed Reed top end speed, but he plays faster than that. And I think a lot of great safeties are like that, because the guy that I think of the most, and I'm not saying that he is like Jesse Bates, but Jesse Bates is a guy that was not a high end speedster, but he covered so much ground. He had so much range, and he did so well playing coverage because he was so smart. I think Watts, not all the way up to Jesse Bates smart yet, at least Bengals Jesse Bates. I didn't watch Jesse Bates at Wake Forest, but I think he's really smart. When I watch him, I see, like, you can see the wheels turn, you can see the processing and how quickly he can recognize things. And there's a couple plays, like one where he's going backward as part of a disguise, and the ball snapped and they slanted out of the run fit, and he stops like on a dime, turns and goes and makes the tackle for about 4 yards, and a play that probably should have gone for a big gain. And it's just like smart coming down to defend the run, but also smart playing coverage and knowing where his responsibilities are. He had a ton of ball production. I really liked him. I think this is, to me, if you hit the second round, he's there. I'd hit it. I'd take that. I don't think I'd take him at 17 just because of the age and athleticism, on-field athleticism. Maybe he tests like a supreme athlete, but I think on-field athleticism doesn't look, it doesn't quite look up there. Maybe he falls a little bit too. I think that's something I've thought of too, because I don't think he is like a Brian Branch, Kyle Hamilton that can play your nickel corner too. Like I think that's where some of the athleticism concerns come in, and you look at that and go like, he's not as smooth as Branch, he's not as long as Hamilton. So I don't know if he can really disrupt things from the nickel as much, but he's a good safety. To me, I watch him, I'm like, that is a good safety back there. I almost think of him, and maybe I'll change this based off like the testing and everything. When I watch him though, it kind of reminds me of the Chiefs' Justin Reed, where I'm like a very physical player, a very smart player. Hopefully a little less of a guy
Justin
in the media.
Reed, future Bengal.
Yeah, but that's kind of how I feel like he plays. Like I'm kind of like looking at like a younger Justin Reed out there, who didn't have the greatest career in Houston, was always like pretty good and kind of like one of those film guys like him under the radar, but he didn't like have some big career. Then goes to Kansas City and he's awesome. He's awesome in Kansas City. Don't know if he's like an all-pro. And maybe that's where you are with Watts, where it's like, I don't know if Watts is an all-pro in the NFL. Like if I thought he was an all-pro, I'd probably take him in the first round. But I think he's a really good safety and I feel good about him. So he was my favorite player on the defense. And then I think we have to talk about Ben Morrison then, because
100%. He's an option. He's definitely an option. And I wouldn't say he's off their board at all. And obviously that connection with Al Golden. So talk about him. Tell us everything you love.
Okay, with Ben Morrison, I don't dislike him the way I dislike like Emmanuel Forbes. When I watched Forbes, I was like, I feel like this is smoke and mirrors. I feel like this production is smoke and mirrors. He's pretty good. Everything I took away from him is just like, yeah, he does a lot of stuff at like a pretty good level. What's the elite trait? Like with Watts, I could think of his intelligence as an elite trait, and his ability to decipher run pass as an elite trait. With Morrison, I just didn't. I don't think I saw an elite trait where he's not elite at the press point. He loses at the press point enough, at least in 2024. I've heard his tape's better in 2023, but then I get a little scared of that because like most guys that you're like, oh, he was better this year. They don't, those guys aren't. Wyatt Davis was one of those guys, and he got cut like year 2. So that's not saying Ben Morrison stinks. I think when you watch him, he doesn't stink. But when I watch him, I go, don't see elite athleticism, don't see an elite, press ability. I think he plays to his leverage really good. I think maybe that's what you look at as an elite trait, but I don't know. To me, he just rings of a solid starter. That is what I see. And that's fine. I think you could use solid starters. It's not he's really young. I think that's where you get the swing for the fences, is that he is like 20 years old now. And at 18 years old as a true freshman or whatever he was awesome. He was a freshman All-American. And 19 years old, when he was a sophomore, he was awesome. He was really good against Ohio State. He was, I don't know if he was an All-American or not, but I think he was a semifinalist for like the defensive back award. And then this year happens and he gets injured. And the hip injury is something you really need to check into, because hip injuries in young people are kind of scary. But I also just think before that, you're watching going like, man, he's getting bodied by a receiver from University of Northern Illinois. That's not ideal. And then against Louisville, he was getting toasted by that wide receiver a bit. I'm just like, yeah, he's solid. I was whelmed. I don't know how to. I wasn't underwhelmed, maybe compared to like where some people have him. I was kind of whelmed. And then like the Daniel Jeremiah top 50 comes out, and Watts isn't on there, so that's the part I disagree with. But the part I agree with was like Morrison was like around 40. I was like, yeah. Like, get yourself a solid corner, a young corner, a guy that, he's got a great draft profile. But I don't see the Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon, or, really, you definitely don't see like the Pat Surtain, Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner out there where you just think this guy's going to be an amazing player. I think the only thing I'll say is I've missed on this type of guy before was I felt similarly about Trent McDuffie. I was like, what does Trent McDuffie do great? And then he hits the NFL. I was like, oh, everything. Okay. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is the one guy maybe this is just a blind spot where a guy is just pretty good at everything and he's really young. He's able to turn it up in the NFL. So I'm giving that as the other side of this. But when I watched him, I did not see an elite draft prospect. I saw a pretty good one. I saw a guy that I would take in round 2. But if that was a pick at 17, it's not like a 2 thumbs down scenario, but it's like, it probably wasn't the best player to me. And then I probably have to go try to talk myself into it or something.
Yeah. At this moment, give me trenches. And it might end up being an offensive alignment. I wouldn't even be surprised at this moment. You need guard position, and maybe they feel better about that in the second round. But obviously, we are less than 3 months away from the NFL draft, but there's a lot in between. I know they're having Senior Bowl practices as we're recording this right now, so we'll get more content from Alabama as the week goes on. And then obviously the game is on Saturday, so we'll get more into the reaction next week of who looked good, who didn't, because there's plenty of content out there, and it's obviously continues to grow. Great job by Jim Nagy and his squad over there. So looking forward to that. There is the Pro Bowl. I just want to end this really quickly with the Pro Bowl. It's still happening. Joe Burrow is actually going to be participating in it. Was a little surprised by that because I feel like every single quarterback says, I don't want to go. I'm not going. I know Josh Allen isn't going, but it seems fresh for Josh Allen after just losing the AFC Championship. Probably wants to get away from it for a little while. But Joe Burrow will be there.
Do you know who the other quarterbacks are for the AFC?
Well, I know who they voted. It was Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow.
With all the people that have said no, do you know who the other 2 are?
Yes.
Okay.
Drake May.
Yep.
And I don't know who the other one is.
Russell Wilson.
Joe Burrow. You know, the NFL, the Pro Bowl content person is going to be like, please, Joe, give us content because no offense to Drake May and Russell Wilson, but you have Joe showing up. So credit to him. I mean, I think that's pretty cool. I know it's more of just fun and games now. It's nothing too serious, but I thought that was cool. Joe's going to be there. Jamar Chase is always fantastic with his content. He'll be there. And Trey Hendrickson will also be in attendance. So, you know what? Of course, I wish they weren't playing this weekend or they weren't going because they needed to get ready for a Super Bowl. But should be something. I'll tune in because Joe will be there.
Yeah.
And Jamar is hilarious. So definitely want to watch that. And is there any takeaways from the Pro Bowl this weekend?
I need Joe Burrow to beat Russell Wilson in the quarterback competition. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. If Russell Wilson is the best AFC quarterback in this quarterback competition, I mean, his own fan base doesn't really love him.
So no, I can't have that.
But,
actually, Joe, don't go to the Pro Bowl.
But it happens. I can't remember who else have been out there, but like elite quarterbacks have been there, and they lose the quarterback competition to like guys are like, that guy's fine. No, Baker Mayfield's pretty good, but I remember he was really good at that quarterback competition to the point where it's like there's better quarterbacks than him here, and he's just dominating this quarterback competition. So some guys are just built for it, I guess. But yeah, I need him to beat at least Russell Wilson in the quarterback competition. I can't have dangerous RW3 going out there and winning this quarterback competition. Just don't want to see it. I don't care if Jamar loses whatever wide receiver thing they got going on.
I don't either. We know he's.
This quarterback competition, it's like the only one that I really care about. Oh, and if the center, if Ted Karras was there, I'd want him to win the snapping thing. But I like that snapping thing. I don't even know if they're going to do it. I think it's Thursday. I like the games. I don't care about the actual flag football game. Maybe I'll catch some highlights on Twitter and stuff, but I usually don't watch that too closely. But I do sit down and watch like the little games that they do.
I do. I will have an interest. I mean, it's actually I'll watch the Jamar and obviously Justin Jefferson will probably be there again. So yeah, I'll see what it's about. It's football when we don't have football this weekend. Kind of football, not really, but it's happening. But any last words from? You know what? I'll ask you this, Mike, as we're recording this, and I'll ask you every month. It's January 28th. Do you expect in the next 4 weeks to be any extension news on the Bengals front?
Ooh, you know what? No, but they have to do something with Higgins, And I was listening to Jake Lisco and Joe Goodberry talk on Twitch today, and look, I think Joe Goodberry's way more connected than I am to this
I
team.
think he's definitely connected. I'm not.
Yeah.
He knows.
He said 80% chance with T. I don't remember if that was just an extension or if he just meant like on the team next year. Maybe he just meant on the team next year. But I was like, oh, that seems high.
Whoa. And I agree. Joe Goodberry is one of those connected. And look, small plug for Joe Goodberry. I do think it's worth
he doesn't need it.
You don't subscribe. He called you out on Twitter. I subscribe to his Twitter. It's $4.99 a month. It's absolutely worth it. He brings in Jake Lisco too. Fantastic. With Bengals coverage and his podcast on Locked On. But and I subscribe to Locked On. Man, I'm just one big subscriber to all of the Bengals content, but all of it is really fantastic. But if Joe is saying 80%, I'm in. And then I think we're gonna have news in the next 4 weeks because they have to.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you'd have to.
I hope so. We need some things to talk about. So instead of the Bengals, won't they sign him? So we'll see in the next 4 weeks. But I'm looking forward to talking everything Senior Bowl next week after the game. Maybe we'll have some Pro Bowl content and what else the Bengals are up to in the off season. Mm-hmm. But again, Mike, plug your work.
Yeah, Twitter, Bengals_Sands. You could do the Blue Sky if you wanted to. And Mike Sands NFL, I try to post some stuff over there too, just to hit all of my bases. And if you don't do social media, check out Cincy Bengals Talk SI. That's where all the writing goes. And obviously this podcast. But yeah, check out the article. It's a beast. It's almost 3,000 words. It's 27 videos, just everything you would ever want to know about Al Golden's front end of the defense. There's a back end coming out next week, I think, unless I really hustle and get it out this week. But I think it'll be next week, back end of Al Golden's defense. So probably similar length and similar level of detail. So if you just want to know a little bit, you just want to know about the Viper position, or if you want to know everything from like the stems and fronts and the slants and pressures, check it out. Yeah. I thought I did basically everything you could do talking about the front of his defense. So that is my only plug. And then follow Lindsay, LNDS Patterson.
Yeah, you know what? No, Mike's work is fantastic. Mike recovered from the flu, and he is fully back. So make sure you check that out. And thank you, as always, for listening. I mean, I'm glad you're back. And thank you for listening to It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati.